friendships within this construct of the family ideal are seen as very disposable. The idea that you could have intimacy amongst friends has a lot of people turning up their nose. Like, ooh, intimacy. I could only have intimacy with one other person, because often intimacy is reduced to sex. We are going to talk about something that I've been discussing for a minute, about how social media devalues friendships. And while I'm going to be using TikToks to make my point here, I actually want to say that I don't think this is simply a byproduct of TikTok. I think across the board that we've seen this social media, particularly within the Black digital landscape, that has moved into the conversations of generational wealth, of hypergamy, and breaking generational curses, and all of these kind of, catch-all phrases tend to really come down to this idea that a value system set on the aesthetics of wealth is what is going to, get you out of something that's been happening for generations. And so, as I constantly say with regards to like relationship discourse, and I feel a lot is overlapping within like the Black family values discourse, is that we are not going to like individually make decisions that get us out of the structural issues that have disenfranchised the Black community for decades. Like, you cannot individually choice your way out of that. But we've seen these sort of narratives which are really kind of codified in relationship discourse, and are even more codified when it comes to friendship discourse, because we live in a very heteronormative society that already has this structure that tells you that as an individual, you are meant to partner with one other person. It's heteronormative forced monogamy. And even if you have a queer identity, or you attempt to move outside of heteronormative monogamy and you're non-monogamous, you are in a same-sex relationship, a lot of the societal standards around heteronormative relationships still seep into all those other categories of relationships, because our society is structured to reward that sort of standard. And so much of like how you file for taxes, how you might apply for a mortgage, how we might deal with what we are dealing, going through now with like as millennials. We've been through a recession, and now is this a recession? Is it just inflation? The pandemic. A lot of those societal issues are handled, and you're informed that they should be handled through your ability to partner with one individual. American society in particular, on the policy level, has actually done a lot to move individuals away from a communal lifestyle. And I think for Black people in America, and really a byproduct of like African American culture, is that the sort of shame we carry from a history of being an enslaved people, having the family structure, completely broken up, because we as humans were broken up. You were not an enslaved full human being. You were body parts, and therefore the children you produced were body parts. And so you never had the ability to form the family structure. We discussed that in sort of like a shameful manner, but then also post-slavery, there was a huge movement across different regional societies within, newly free enslaved people, to move them towards a white Protestant standard. This is also a byproduct where you get respectability politics at, but this white Protestant standard that says, well, the family structure that you desire should be the family structure that you saw on the plantation, where the man is the head of the household, the wife has the family duties, and then you have, just enough children to pass on your lineage to, except for, obviously African Americans are not given the property value to really pass on. And then there's never a period where Black women don't work. And so you are both handling domestic work within your household, but then told, okay, well, you're more than equipped to be the domestic worker outside the household. And so you kind of see over the history of like the African American community is this attempt to build themselves up, but they kind of are re-engaging in the understanding of family that was also built on their labor. The idea of the gendered roles is really kind of used against us. And I think the way we then talk about friends is a byproduct of that same system, right? That we have been sold into this very heteronormative standard of one monogamous partner. The man plays a specific role, or there's always a male identified person in the relationship who plays a specific role. There is always a femme identified person in the relationship who plays a specific role. And then there are the children that are taken care of by these two people. But I think like all those things, like the idea of how we talk about and how transactional this conversation around partnering and family and breaking generational curses has come down even harder around friendships, because friendships within this construct of the family ideal are seen as very disposable. The idea that you can have intimacy amongst friends has a lot of people turning up their nose. Like, ooh, intimacy. I can only have intimacy with one other person, because often intimacy is reduced to sex. So I think that there has been a movement, when I think about mis and disinformation in the Black digital landscape, I think there's been a huge anti-intellectual movement that has really started with, okay, we'll do a little bit of relationship advice, but let's also talk about why you should, as a Black woman, you should not be friends or trust other women. We get this sort of messaging. And so it's easier for me to download TikToks and play them. They're shorter, they're easier to download. I'm not going to get copyright striked, and it's less likely to start drama. People are less likely to send this video to the creator. But to download TikToks and talk about it from the concept of what's being pushed forth in a 30-second video, this sort of messaging is happening across Instagram. It's happening across YouTube. Instagram, it's impossible to search. So unless I remember to save a post at the time when I see it or it's brought to my attention, it's really hard to go through the archives of Instagram. And then YouTube is just a lot more tedious to pull video from. So we're going to start with this video from a person that looks like an AI. I don't really understand why they're talking like this, so we can get into this topic.
Don't be sad that you don't have many friends. Remember, a Lamborghini has 2 seats. A bus has 30.
The beginning here, we are seeing this sort of messaging that again correlates to wealth with this idea of minimizing the importance of friendships. That you don't need a lot of people when you have a lot of material value surrounding you. And I think that is a very dangerous message, particularly for Black people, and particularly from people that exist within sub-communities of their communities. I think this idea that we are going to devalue friends and then devalue essentially the necessity of a community is really dangerous, because material things can never buy you safety. Material things might get you fans and might get people who desire or aspire to hold your sort of lifestyle, but they don't provide safety. They don't provide the care and compassion. They don't provide romance. And I do think it's interesting that within this fixation of transactional relationships, or even just like hypergamy, if we want to call it that like, I would say, okay, well, you're taking away the emotional aspects of a relationship simply for the material. And people be like, I'd rather cry in a Benz or a Bentley than cry in a Nissan Altima. But I'm like, honestly, a lot of y'all just end up going on a few dates to like, what's the new restaurant? Atlanta just opened a Nobu. Y'all getting a few espresso martinis and some decent cuts of Wagyu steak. Like, how fun can that be? For how sustainable is that, right? Like, how often is that the lifestyle that you're just stretching for?
My mom has so many girlfriends, yet she has never, and I mean ever, been in any drama. It's fascinating to me, and I'm always asking her how she does it, because I avoid having too many friends because people be trifling. I like peace, and I'm going to tell you what she does to keep the peace. For one, she never vents to her friends about personal issues, because venting can potentially cause problems with others in your personal life. So instead, she vents to my dad, her husband. 2, she's great at keeping her friends' secrets. It's amazing. And that's why people trust and confide in her all the time. 3, she never takes anything personally. Say, for example, a friend of hers is giving her an attitude, right? And they're just not being themselves. She won't reciprocate their energy because she knows that they're going through something. And the way that they're acting has nothing to do with her.
I don't think the messaging that she's sharing is like that harmful, but I do think there is something to interrogate around the idea that you never vent to your friends. To me, that means you don't actually have friends. If I do not have friends who I can be emotionally vulnerable with, I don't have friends. I might have homegirls for a good time. I might have social acquaintances. Also, maybe I should clarify some language here, right? Because I think there are different types of friends that you can have in your life. I don't necessarily have the nomenclature to define what each friend cycle is, because to me, I have social acquaintances. So it's people that I like to have a good time with, but I might not be inclined to share my personal business with them. I have different rings of friends. So because friends, maybe there is a little bit more fluidity allowed, or that I personally allow in my friendships, because we don't live together. We don't live in close proximity together, and I've moved a lot. So I do have people that I still value as friends, who I will still show up as friends, but I don't have the same expectation of communication, of including them in my life or them including me in their life, because there is a physical distance, and time has just happened, and at this period in our life we're not as close as we used to be, but nothing, like, there's no real reason for the lack of closeness. It's just, the way life plays out. And then I have my circle of close friends. They're my peoples, and I love them deeply. And the idea that at minimum I don't have a close ring of friends who I don't vent to. You don't vent, and I guess it's just about a matter of like how you receive the language, right? I get it. Don't trauma dump on your friends. I don't have friends who I just call up and I'd be like, girl, and I like just like vent to them about my day completely. But I to me, the idea that she says my mom does not vent to any of her friends, she only vents to her husband. That is a distinction to me where, do you not have any friends who you have any emotional vulnerability with, right? I don't vent to everybody that I consider a friend. And honestly, I don't discuss the same things with every friend. I think part of being a friend is also that my friends come to me with what's going on in their lives. And so there is a balance, there is a labor, there is amount of thoughtfulness that has to be the base of these relationships, where we have the ability to think before we speak. Come on over to the Patreon, patreon.com/Jouelzy. It's where I do all my live streaming.